Welcome, everybody. My name's Ken Seaton, co-founder of Athletes Touch with Justin Blaine. Welcome to the Tower of Power podcast that we've got coming at you right now. We're an exclusive community helping former pro and college athletes in the business world get ready to rocket fuel your ship, professionally speaking. I'm here. Justin, go ahead and take it away.
If you like great stories, sports, and success, you're in the right place. Buckle up and join us for a great ride.
Today, you're going to hear from Bobby Hacker. He's negotiated big deals for Major League Baseball players, and he's now negotiating major deals for esports athletes. If you ever wanted to know how deals are made, Bobby is actually the person that can tell us all about it. He has an incredible, rich history. Can't wait to hear his story. So welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here. I'm also happy to know that, well, thanks, Mark, for turning me on to the organization. And I heard that there's a couple other Golden Bears on the call, so go Bears.
Well, listen, Bobby, we'll kind of start off getting kind of directly to the point with you a little bit here, but tell us a little bit about the key relationships in your life that helped you get into the sports world and in the business of sports, if you will, and maybe give us a little background too.
Sure. Well, before I start, I played rugby at Cal, so that's my athlete connection. And then I played for like another 30 odd years or so. You know, I'm a lawyer, and when I went to law school, there was no such thing as sports law. I mean, I just thought you were a lawyer and you went to court. I soon discovered when I started practicing that there were other things to do besides going to court. And I also realized that after a few years of practice that I really wanted to, work at a network or a studio or something. Lo and behold, acquaintance of mine who was working at Fox Sports calls me one day and says, hey, there's a get your foot in the door job at Fox. So I got my foot in the door. As soon as I started, I made sure to get to know all the production executives, all the people in the business, the finance people, the HR people, and the actual production people that were getting the stuff on the air. Lo and behold, 6 weeks after I started, the two heads of Fox Sports, David Hill and Ed Gorin, came up to me, and they'd had a business affairs executive in the sports group who had left. And after 6 weeks, they came up to me and they said, you know what, you can do all that work. So 6 weeks after I started, I sort of became the lead business and legal affairs guy for the national sports programming at Fox Sports. I was an entertainment lawyer. Working in sports as an athlete myself and an avid sports fan, it was, the best match possible for my interests and my skill set.
That's awesome. Was anybody sort of formative for you, Bobby? What sort of inspired you for the sports stuff? Obviously, being a rugby player, you enjoyed it yourself, but what was the whole draw for you?
Well, sometimes you have to take a deep look in the mirror and say to yourself, being a litigator is just anathema to everything about me. I just didn't feel it was my strong suit for a variety of reasons. I thought doing business deals suited me, my personality more. And I slowly went from litigation to doing real estate litigation and then real estate transactional work. And then I started doing the entertainment stuff. And it was just, dare I say, a widget I was more interested in dealing with on a day-to-day basis. You ask about advice. I once had a boss who was the managing partner of a big law firm. And he was just an amazing guy. His name was George Link, also a California Golden Bear, great guy. I learned two great lessons from him. I went to his office once asking for more money. I was working as a sort of administrator at this firm, and I didn't get the money. But he applauded me on my effort because I went in and gave him information on what I had done and the things I had achieved and why I ought to get paid more. And he proceeds to tell me the story about a young lawyer who once came to him and wanted more money because of family circumstances. And he says, that's nice to know, but it's about your value to the enterprise that determines compensation and some other things. But it was that day that he looks at me and he says, you know the difference between a manager and a leader? And I didn't know if it was a trick or what. He says, a manager does things right. A leader does the right thing. And not a day has gone by that I haven't thought about that, because it really matters to let people know that they have value. It's a simple little lesson, but it also greases the wheels for everything you do in an enterprise.
I love that story, by the way, Bobby. So you go in-house at Fox and your timing is unbelievable, but when did you really feel like I'm here now? I'm a real lawyer and I'm doing deals and I know what I'm doing. And this is exciting. Kind of bring us to that moment.
I'll tell you exactly when it happened. It was second week of September in 2000. And I was sitting at my desk, and I had been engaged in working on a new baseball broadcast rights deal. I was responsible for negotiating the terms. And I was also finalizing Fox's first broadcast rights deal with NASCAR, which was also the first global deal where NASCAR was able to get all of the tracks to consolidate their rights and go to the networks for uniform TV packages. I was less stressed about the deal than I was about getting them completed so I could jump on a plane to fly to Aspen for the Aspen Rugger Fest. And I'd been stressed about, are we going to get this done? Are we going to get this done? And lo and behold, the day before I was leaving, we closed all the terms. But it was also the moment that I looked down at my desk and realized that I was just responsible for about $2.5 billion of rights deals. And I had this moment, and I was thinking to myself when I called a friend of mine who was a senior executive over at NBC Entertainment, I'm kind of freaked out. I said, I'm sitting here looking at my desk with $2.5 billion of deals that somebody thinks that I know what the hell I'm doing and I'm responsible for the legal side of all of these deals. And I don't know if they realize that they put Bobby Hacker in charge of all of this. And he laughed and he said, I've been doing this for 20 years in the entertainment space, and I ask the same question every day. So what I learned then expressly was that if you are working anywhere and lose your humility, it's a very slippery slope for the rest of your career, because the moment you think you're bigger or better, it sort of turns off the knowledge faucet. And once you turn that off and lose that humility, you're in for a rude awakening if you don't every day go, man, I am lucky and I'm going to watch my ass on everything I do.
That's an amazing story. Tell us another deal that floated your boat that obviously had some real economic value. Maybe there was some real challenge in getting it to happen, and sort of how it all kind of transpired maybe in the last second, that kind of a story.
There are very few deals, certainly in the sports world, that just suddenly come together. They are long and tortured processes. There are, the stories of how the Big Ten decided to create a network. But for me, it was always interesting because I think in the major sports, the big sports, everybody just took the approach that this is how we've done it, this is the way it is. That's a bad starting point. And there's a particular league that I think was more difficult than the others, and I won't say their name, the National Football League. That was a bit more difficult to deal with because when you're the king, sometimes you lose sight of people of the realm. And I think what was brought out most clearly is I used to always have the same comment to the executives that I dealt with in the broadcast world, which was, we aren't in the 1950s anymore. And this came to a head in a negotiation where this is in the second deal I worked on, rights deal with the NFL in 2005. We were discussing certain rights and obligations in the deal, and it was very difficult for them to sort of release on some traditions that they had. But we worked through them, which led to 2012 when we had our next big deal, where the rights fee went from $750 million to $1.1 billion a year average. I believe, and I don't know how COVID's going to impact it, but networks may be paying a 60 or 70% premium for the next deal, which is sort of in limbo right now. But in 2012, the NFL had they've always had this mobile deal with Verizon. And I spent an hour and a half in a negotiating session, a room full of people, because I was the precocious guy who said, well, what is a mobile device? And I then brought out my brand new iPad 2 in 2011. And I said, well, is this a mobile device? And they said, no, that's not a mobile device. And I said, well, I have this program on it called Tango that allows me to use my iPad as a phone. So are you going to exclude us being able to deliver a signal through an MVPD onto this? And they were befuddled. And we literally probably spent an hour talking about what a phone is based upon the dimensions of the phone, which I let them go on and on about. And then I said, what about this new Galaxy phone they have that's actually a half-inch bigger in either direction than what you just described? So the lesson in a long way is that there's one thing to be aware of. As a lawyer, you're aware of the law and how it changes. But you also have to be aware of the world around you. And I use the expression, which is actually the title of a book I'm working on, no blinders. So in whatever your practice is in your field, If you're just so laser focused that you can't see what's going on to the right or to the left, you're going to miss out on stuff. And for the same token, when you're negotiating these rights deals, you have to be aware of everything that's going on, not just sort of the standard terms and conditions of an agreement, but what's the impact on everything else going on that surrounds your rights to broadcast and the world. And more importantly, in that instance I just talked about, the means by which you're going to receive that programming.
Excellent. Thanks, Bob. Can you talk a little bit about how Fox Sports has grown? Just give us a little history, because I think it's been pretty interesting. So I'd love to hear a little bit around that.
Sure. Well, say what you will about Rupert Murdoch, but one of the smartest people that you'd ever have the opportunity to meet, and he is at heart a newspaper guy. But when he bought the Fox television network, he realized that in order to get more affiliates, because under the FCC rules, you're only allowed to own, each network could only own a certain limited number of stations. So you have to sign affiliation agreements with all the different markets in which you don't own a station. Rupert was smart enough to realize that while the tastes of viewership may change, the one unifying programming was live sports. And the most popular sport in any day part is the NFL, and the most popular NFL package is the NFC. So Rupert went after the NFC. Now, at the time in 1993, Fox wasn't even a real network. Even in all the union agreements, it was an addendum to the standard agreement because it only had 2 hours a night, not every day when it launched. And Rupert went in and everybody said, oh, CBS, which had it since Rozelle, got the NFL the rights to bargain as a unit for their TV rights, had always been at CBS. The NFL knew there was a lurking giant out there, much as everyone knows Amazon's a lurking giant out there in the next deal. Rupert went in and offered the astronomical sum of like $400 million a year. CBS was at like 235 or 240 or something. So Rupert was able to get the NFL because once he had the NFL, now all these affiliates around the country are going to say, oh, I want to be on the Fox network and I want NFL because A, it's great programming. And even though I'm only going to get a limited number of commercial spots in those games, I can sell those for a super premium. More importantly, having the NFL, then that in turn allows for the promotion of entertainment programming and other opportunities for the local station. So in 1994, Fox starts Fox Sports, and then 2 years later, they get their first baseball deal. So now they're Fox Sports. They have football and baseball, and then they're selling a lot of real estate for time buys. Somebody wants to do a skating program or a golf one-off, like a single tournament or something. And we started to build, and you had football and you had baseball. So I came in 98, a couple years into a baseball deal, sort of in the first football deal. And then eventually baseball became, when we did the deal in 2000, starting in 2001, it had been a split. NBC had some and Fox had some, but Fox went all in 2000 and said, we're taking everything. So it broadened Fox's reach in a number of ways. Meanwhile, they're developing, starting in 1996 also is when they start the regional sports networks. So realizing that local sports had a value and in fact supported the national sports programming. And from there it went on, eventually started doing deals. We had the Cotton Bowl for many years, and then Fox did a deal with the BCS, which is a whole other story. So it just kept growing and growing, and obviously the NASCAR presence added to it. But basically at Fox, you've got the NFL, NFC package, the crown jewel of all television sports. You've got Major League Baseball, which is really, because you have so much content on regional platforms and so many national games, the investment in regular season is really about driving to All-Star Game, which is generally the highest rated program in the summer on any day part, and then to postseason baseball where you really, the value of your contract is sports, NASCAR, and, since I've left, they've expanded into some other things.
Welcome to the intermission. Kent, who's this group for? Is it for Super Bowl champs?
Check.
How about cross-country skiers?
Check.
How about Olympic synchronized swimmers?
Triple check.
So it sounds like anybody who has an athlete's mindset or mentality could qualify here.
Quadruple check, Justin. This group is a rocket fuel powered community for former athletes to use their state of mind to succeed in the sport of business. That's some great stuff, Bobby. appreciate sort of a more historical picture of how things have sort of transitioned and transformed at Fox Sports. Can you share your experience working at Fox post 9/11, and what, if anything, you learned from those times?
Yeah, I think one of the big lessons I learned was all of a sudden and it's the only thing by which I can analogize what we're going through today. And I'll give you the examples. When 9/11 hit, we were all gobsmacked. I'm a lawyer and I have responsibility. And I was the guy on top of everything else that went to the executives of the company and said, I just want you to know that I have to go to the Directors Guild and get waivers for us. And they said, well, why do you have to have waivers? I said, because we have signed deal memos with directors and associate directors, and under the collective bargaining agreement, we've bound them. We have to pay them for games that won't be played. Now, of course, the executives were outraged. What do you mean? There's no game. Why should we have to play them? I said, well, because there's a collective bargaining agreement that says we do. In that instance, I went to the guild and I said, look, we believe right now that we're going to play a full season. We're not going to lose any games. And the guild gave us a waiver on the upcoming week. So we worked that out. But more importantly, I learned at the time, insurance companies were taking the position that they weren't going to pay claims because terrorist acts were not covered under policies of insurance. I took that very seriously and went into all of the forms that we used, and we had standard force majeure language. And I went in and every single form agreement we had at Fox Sports, I added the words acts or threatened acts of terrorism just to give us an out that we might not otherwise have had. Fast forward or slow forward 20 years, and here we are in a COVID crisis. And I had a situation through the Sports Lawyers Association, of which I'm the president, is we had an annual conference scheduled for May in Miami. And there were people in my own board saying to me, oh, well, at least we can get out via force majeure. And in reading the force majeure language of the hotel agreement, I said, nah, you got a weak argument, but they could say no force majeure event that would give rise. Our cancellation insurance policy, they said the exact same thing. But in some very twisted way, I went a 10-day period from looking at basically the risk of taking the reserves of my organization down to almost nothing. Suddenly there was a national emergency declared, and that was a trigger for governmental acts that the hotel finally said, yeah, force majeure. We, of course, then said, well, our next open date is 2023. Can we book your hotel for 2023? Of course, they were happy to know they got the future business. But in turn, that experience taught me to go in and trying to come up with something that would address a health crisis or a global pandemic. But, again, a unique event, and it triggers something in a document that you've been using, and you say to yourself, how best can I protect my client? And you have an event we might not have thought of. I don't reflect much on pandemics of 100 years ago, but now I have a current one, and it's caused me to refocus sort of counsel I give to my clients. And I've had other clients come to me and say, well, isn't this a force majeure? And I actually had a lecture at a Zoom lecture at UC Irvine Law School, the sports law class, and it ended up 2 hours just talking about force majeure, because many people think, oh, you couldn't predict this, an act of God, we have the defense of force majeure. Not necessarily. So again, you got to dig a little deeper and look in a little deeper and let the realities of the world inform your crafting of legal documents.
Bobby, yeah, thank you for that. And I think from a legal perspective, obviously a lot of lawyers on the call here, so pretty relevant stuff today. Bobby, what do you think happens with the NBA G League taking top talent from the NCAA? And what will ultimately happen with paying players in college? Or does the NCAA continue to resist change going forward?
Well, I'm going to try to withhold the incredible animus I have towards the NCAA. I think that their survival is in peril for a variety of reasons. First part of your question was the G League. Since NC2A basketball went to the one and done rule, are these really the student athletes? They're going because they can't come out of high school anymore, so they go to college. I mean, I don't know. I'm not going to make a general statement, but there are some exceptions I know about where athletes have gone and they went pro, but they actually loved the college experience. They loved going to class. They were actually student athletes. But if you're, that good and have the ability to go pro, and the G League is an option and you don't have to go play in the Australian Basketball League, I guess it's okay. Personally, I'm not a fan of the one and done rule. But I kind of, I was a huge fan. I'm a huge fan of college sports. And college basketball was great when you could follow these guys' careers. But I think the NCAA has responded much more quickly than I thought to the name, image, and licensing issues, which is the hot button issue in the NCAA right now. And I think that they realize that if they're going to maintain the juggernaut that is the collegiate sports landscape, that they have got to start being a little nimble. And that first step is giving athletes their name, image, and likeness rights and figuring that out. And, it is the most unruly sweater with the most hanging threads, because once you get into the name, image, and likeness thing, it invites representation and agency. And how do you redefine what an amateur is if they have representation for their name, image, and likeness rights? And how do you separate that from when the athlete needs an agent to represent them as a professional athlete? Where is that dividing line? What is amateurism? I think you look at the Stevens Act, which is the Olympic Act, U.S. code somewhere, that defines why the U.S. Olympic Committee owns the word Olympic. Never use the word Olympic or you'll get the nastiest letter you've ever received in your life. Lanham Act aside, can't use it. It's protected. The NCAA, by the same token, has had this control of what amateurism is, and they have put athletes in a position. They've taken this long-standing argument that, oh, well, our quid pro quo here is that we're providing them a free education. Well, when I went to college a zillion years ago, even then, yeah, you had to go to class. Most of them graduated or ended up finishing graduating. But, they had a tough time surviving because of the prohibition against having a job. Was it pristine? No. Might somebody have said to someone, boy, I sure would like to go home, but I can't afford it. And after a game, there's a ticket in their locker. Yeah. So let's stop the nonsense and allow the athletes to make money on the name, image, and likeness. Is the NCAA concerned that some of their money will be taken away from them and distributed to someone else? Yeah, but that's sort of the right way to do it, because you can't live in this fantasy world of saying these are, amateur athletes when you have so many programs, not all programs, but you're looking at, Power 5 conference basketball and football programs that are generating hundreds of millions of dollars for the institutions, and the cost of the scholarship for the athlete is significantly less. And look, it goes on and on and on and on. But I think that the rapidity which the NCAA has moved on the name, image, and likeness world is sort of the hugest paradigm shift in the history of that organization. Whether it allows it to survive, I think my opinion is that they're acting in such a way as to try to sustain their continued existence.
Justin Gimelstob, I think you had a question, right?
Pac-12 network was so lauded. How does it shake out, and when do we ever get to watch one of our teams actually play?
Well, it's really interesting because you look at other conference properties that have done really well. Big Ten has been a huge success. I think, the SEC network has got a shot. Problem with the Pac-12 network is Commissioner Scott was hailed as a genius, but he got a property that has had and continues to have trouble getting carriage anywhere. And without carriage, you're not going to get a big following. More importantly, to my dying day, I will not understand why you would say, particularly with football and basketball, oh, look, we have an opening here at 7:30 Pacific Coast time. Well, that's 10:30 on the East. And if it's a football game, are somebody going to stay up and watching a Pac-12 game till 1 o'clock in the morning? No, that's where the ratings are doing so poorly. And again, if you want to get carriage, you have to have a cost at which you're going to charge the MVPDs that they're willing to pass on to their subscribers.
I don't mean to interrupt, but didn't he misplay his hand early on with DirecTV? Didn't it go sideways?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's the whole carriage issue.
Yeah.
Is you go in and you say, okay, we should get the same as the Big Ten or the SEC. No, you shouldn't. And you can't build it seemed to me a big jump to think that you could get the same fees for your content that other conferences could get. And you look at the pattern of Big Ten alumni and where they are around the country versus Pac-12, and they had a better plan and had the fans were, I think, more aggressive in wanting to get the programming. And I just think the marketing of the Pac-12 was done poorly, and they should have risked going in on their first 3-year carriage deal at a much lower number and use that just to get your foot in the door to build it up and had a better long range plan. But no, they're smarter than I am.
Listen, Bobby, we actually had a couple more questions, but we really appreciate you taking some time this morning to come out and share with us.
Another great story in the books. Who's inspired with me? Kent, where do people go from here?
God, Justin, I'm so glad you asked me that question. Everybody today, we're so excited to have you on this show. If you're interested in our Rocket Fuel Accelerator, if you'd like to join membership at Athletes Touch, go to our awesome website at www.athletestouch.co, and we'll see you soon. If you want to look us up on our social handles, LinkedIn and Twitter, Athletes Touch, at Athletes Touch. Thanks, guys.